Life estate is simply a different way of breaking down an interest in real estate. Normally, when we think of real estate, we're used to breaking real estate down into parcels or different sections, different chunks of land. But we can also break down ownership in real estate into interests in time. For example, if I were to own a piece of real estate for a year or 2 years or for my entire life, that's a different type of ownership. So say I own that interest in real estate for my entire life, and after I pass away, someone else owns that interest and they automatically take over. My interest in that property is said to be a life estate. Well, there's different reasons people will create a life estate. Number one, some people may use it as an estate planning mechanism. When we look at a life estates will avoid the probate process. When you create a life estate, you have the current interest for the lifetime of the person that holds the current life estate. And then when they pass away, someone else, the remainder person, automatically takes over that interest. So upon the passing of that person with a life estate, because that remainder person is taking over, automatically there's not necessarily a need to go through the probate process. So some families will use that as a way to plan and do estate planning for probate avoidance purposes. Here's a way that they're oftentimes done is mom and dad will have a piece of property and they will transfer away the future interest in that property. So they will retain a life estate for themselves and transfer away the future interest once they pass away to their children. So mom and dad have the property, life estate, remainder interest to the children. When mom and dad pass away, the children automatically have that property. Now, that can accomplish a few things for the parents, if that's their objectives. Number one is it can avoid the probate process. Number two is it can take that remainder interest, the portion of the property that has the value beyond mom and dad's life expectancy. And it takes that out of the estate of mom and dad in this example and transfers it to the children because that future interest has value. And that value is calculated based upon life expectancies and so forth on IRS tables. The thing that you need to be aware of if you're going to acquire a life estate or transfer away a portion of your property and retain a life estate is that you are no longer the sole owner of that property. So that other owner in the equation may impact your rights. If you want to later sell that property, you can only sell the portion of the property that you have your interest in. So that period of time during your lifetime. If you want to sell a portion of interest greater than that, the normal interest that we think about in a property forever in time, you would need the consent of the remainder person. In this case, the children. You would need them to consent because their value of that future interest in the property does have value. And so those interests would then need to be brought together if you were going to sell that property as a whole in the typical fashion that we're used to. Well, the thing you need to keep in mind is that a life estate is a tool. If you're using it for estate planning purposes, you want to make sure that it's the proper tool for what you're trying to do. Right? Is a life estate the proper tool? Is a transfer on death designation the proper tool? Is a trust the proper tool? Should you be placing that piece of property in an LLC maybe? What you want to do is make sure that you're using the proper tool for the job. And if taking your piece of real estate, retaining a life estate and transferring the future interest to your children accomplishes your objectives of you or your family, then it may very well be the right tool for the job. But you need to make sure it's the right tool based on what you're trying to achieve. The alternatives will depend on what your underlying objectives are. If you are trying to protect and preserve assets to qualify for Medicaid, I think the first thing you want to do is see our other video on irrevocable trusts, because there may be better ways to protect and preserve assets other than using life estates. A life estate may be part of the equation and may be something to consider, But in and of themselves, I don't see life estates as being a cure-all for people seeking to qualify for Medicaid. A life estate is completely different from a will in that a life estate is an interest in property, whereas a will is a legal document that takes effect upon someone's death. Now, a life estate, the interest in that property, will expire upon a person's death, so they both have similar characteristics. The life estate, the ownership in that underlying parcel of property will expire upon that person's death and then transfer to the remainder person, but that's a function of ownership, and that's a function of that ownership expiring. Whereas a will, that's passing ownership at someone's death and a gift of those assets because that person has expired. The ownership itself hasn't expired. That's a gift and a transfer of property that someone opted to do before their passing, once they then have passed. The value of life estates are determined by life expectancy. If we take a look at the individual holding the life estate, their value would be determined by how long they are expected to live. If it's a younger person, statistically, they are likely to be around for a longer period of time, and they're going to hold that ownership interest for a longer period of time, and that will have greater value than if we have an older person who's likely to pass away in the shorter term. That ownership period of that property will be shorter in duration, and therefore just naturally have less value. Well, the IRS has developed tables, actuarial tables, to tell us how long someone's statistically likely to live, and those we use to compute the values of the underlying life estates and remainder interests.